Hi everybody, Adam Steele here, and this is the Mix Engineer React series. Today we are back with something that has been requested once or twice, but is also very much in the zeitgeist at the moment, and that is Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, which, yes, appeared in Stranger Things and has been a kind of a big deal recently, and I make no bones about it because it's being talked about. That's why we're going to talk about it. No coffee this morning. It is a heat wave here as I film this, so might have coffee in the next video, but for now, it's ice water time, everybody. It's like 40 degrees C, and that's just like, what, 110 for the Americans? It's hot. So, yes, let's feel like we're in hell and listen to this song. So we're going to break this down. We're going to use iZotope's Ozone to highlight some EQ frequencies, Brainworks' BX Control to show the mids and the sides and all that kind of stuff. And we've also got Waves WLM, which will tell us some of the metering for this to tell us about different volume levels and dynamic ranges. So we've got some fun toys to play with. And I'm going to be stopping a lot to talk about the things that we hear, because this isn't a songwriting reacts. This isn't a how good does this sound reacts. This is me listening for things that a mix engineer would listen for and pointing out what's cool about it. So here we go. Alright, so there's already so much. It's not a particularly loud track, at least at the beginning. You can see later on in the track, this does get louder, which means there's a lot of dynamic range. Let's look at the meters here. So the intro to the song, we're looking at minus 20 LUFS, and Spotify and platforms like that tend to average out at, I think it's minus 14 LUFS. So this is a good 6 dB less than that meter, although as we get up here, we will see that it does reach those levels. But we'll get back to that later. And immediately, I want to start talking about the drums. There's a pattern here that is on a Lindrum machine that I can hear going da 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 da. But it almost sounds like it's pushing, and that's, I believe there is a real drum kit in there as well. So I'm going to put the sides in and see what we hear outside. Mostly hearing a gated reverb there, which by 1985-86 is very much kind of becoming a style after, you know, Phil Collins, In the Air Tonight and all that kind of stuff with that doo-doop, doo-doop, doo-doop. So that could be something like an AMS reverb with the non-linear mode, or it could be a more natural reverb that has been gated. Should definitely talk about that synth thing at this point as well. That's been stereo processed, that minute, and I'm not entirely sure how, but it's not dead mono. It could be that it's been through some sort of spatial effect. But that comes from a Fairchild, which was an incredibly expensive sampling, I'd say sampling keyboard, but it was definitely a whole like computer workstation thing that was one of the original samplers, and they cost as much as a lot of houses. But what I can hear that's weird here is that the sample that's been sampled goes bow and has a distinct ba-ba with two things. That's one sample. And I know that because you'll hear a little bit in the playing where there is the odd one where it's a single, but that's where they've just touched the keyboard and let it go before it can play the second part. And the way that I know it's a single sample is as they play it at different pitches, the second part that plays slightly slower on the lower notes, and that's because the way that samplers work, to play that pitch, to play that sound lower, it just plays the whole thing back a little bit slower, and so as it plays it slower, that gap gets longer. Just have a listen. So you can hear that first one, that ba-da, is pretty much in time with the beat, but the lower ones come in slightly late. So it goes ba-wah, ba-wah, ba-wah. I'm exaggerating there, but that's what happens. And you can hear them cascading there with that ba 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 ba. And where the timing is just quite sloppy because that's the way that sample playback just happened in the 80s. And immediately we get to the vocals, and I can talk about that all day. There are two distinct, different vocal parts here. There's a main vocal, and then there's like a call and response. Now, the main part, as I would say, is the first part, the call, has quite a lot of processing on it in a very 80s style. But let's break that down and see what it is. It doesn't hurt me. So that, yeah. Let's talk about that first, actually, because that's easier. That has a very definite high frequency lift, maybe a Pultec, or maybe it's an SSL desk with a high end just cranked. And that's got some sort of stereo effect. Maybe it's a delay on one side and then hard panned. Maybe it's some other technique like an AMS pitch shifter or an eventide harmonizer or something. But let's just check. I think that's a lot brighter on the right side than the left. That might be the clue. Here's the right side. And the left side. Nope, that's in my head. That's fine. But the main vocal is in the middle, and it's much less extreme EQ, which we can tell because it's got a very full kind of middle presence. So we can hear Kate singing right from that vocal range, that kind of. Let's bring up Ozone and just show you that. Here we go. So that's the mids right there, and notice when I solo that middle section there, because you've got bass, middle, treble. When I solo that, Kate Bush's voice is still very prominent and louder than anything else, pretty much. Whereas if I solo something really high, we'll hear much more of that second vocal. So up there, those vocals sound about equal volume, but down here at 1K, we can hear that main vocal feels much louder than the other one. So in different frequency ranges, different elements, balances is what helps put them in different places in a mix. And let's just move on a little bit and just listen to more of that main vocal, and I'll try and tell you about the processing that's on it. So yeah, you can feel the song building there, but it's more Kate Bush's vocal energy that is building than any elements in the mix yet. And I think that's to do with there's elements in there, like there's a slap back echo delay on there, which I can hear on the more percussive parts of the vocal. where it's going ba-ba, 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 and it's kind of instantly repeating it, but only once. It's a very, usually 70s trick. It was something John Lennon did all the time. So there is a reverb on there that's quite big, but I say big, it sounds big, but it's not very long, which means there's room for clarity on the vocals. Let's see if we can find it on the sides. So on the sides, I can hear a lower synth. There's kind of a synth pad that keeps going bong, bong, and we can definitely hear that vocal. So the delay, the reverb must be a stereo effect coming back on the mixing desk in, say, some sort of stereo bus. If I mono that, that should really drop out and we should have a very focused main vocal. That gap there really illustrates how much space in the mix Kate Bush's vocal is taking, because as soon as she stops singing, it really dips in dynamic, which is interesting. But she is also not using the Fairlight sample until after this little gap here. And like we just did a react with How Soon Is Now by the Smiths, and that surprised me just how much vocal there was of Morrissey's, and that was roughly the same time period as this. So maybe that was de rigueur in mixing in the mid-80s, was make sure the vocals really up front. Oh, and here's a really good example of how there must be some relatively heavy compression on the vocal, or they're using something like an SSL desk with automation to ride the vocal level, because she's getting quieter and quieter. I can tell that from the way that the kind of the harsh in the vocal fades away as she's singing more softly, but she doesn't get quieter. We still hear her over the music, but you can hear that she's not projecting and blasting as much. She's becoming softer and softer with the vocal, which suggests to me that either a compressor or some very extreme vocal level riding is happening. Maybe both. Let's just play it from a little further back and you'll hear she's really going for it, and then goes, ooh, and you can see it on my screen here where it goes from these green bits to these orange bits. This is something in Reaper called spectral peaks, where I can see what the dominant frequency is in something. And so we can see that the dominant frequency gets lower, so that the bit that we can hear, the loudest, is lower down rather than that big piercing projection. So here we go again. Very bassy, and then here we go, big, and then I think we're going to hit a big bit here. That was interesting that she suddenly started to overlap the two vocals. You can hear the higher one that's got the stereo processing sitting outside of the main one. That's a really good mix trick if you've got more than one vocal to do. Don't have them in the same panning space, don't have them in the same EQ space. And I can definitely hear that that outside one is in some sort of room. So either she's physically stood further back in a room to record that, or they've run it back through a room reverb or an actual room of some kind. We can hear it on the sides. It sounds kind of, yeah, it's not a reverb as in a reverb. It's being put in a space. It's what I call situational reverb rather than creative reverb. As the song's building, there are more synth parts now. There's a more determined thing on the sides, that banap, banap, banap. We got full-on Phil Collins toms there, but then we got a big explosion, and there were two separate events. Listen to that section again. You'll hear the da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, with very short yet big reverbs that stop, and then the last one has a otherwise, if they hadn't done that and they just let a big reverb go through the whole thing, that would have been just an indistinct mush. I suspect that the way they did that is the toms had some sort of gated reverb that they've been using on the rest of the track, like they've been using on the vocals. But then that is not the same reverb. That's actually a sample from something like the Fairlight, maybe, that they've got a big reverby sound and they've just kind of played that in. And then we're back to our lower dynamic. Ooh, there was a little clap that brought us back then, which panned across. Listen for this in the sides. That. We're really starting to hear more elements come in now. That sounded quite confused to me because a lot was going on in the same space. That may well have been part of the reason for doing that, because this is supposed to be a song that's increasing in tension and getting more and more epic. And it may well be that she's trying to get more in your face, that it's not a beautiful sound. It's kind of a, slightly confusing sound. So we can hear an extra vocal that is slightly out-panned, but is in the same vocal range, and it's kind of it's not exactly a descant or a harmony. And then we had a really big 80s guitar in there, which I can kind of tell from the way it went from right left that it's two different takes that have just been hard panned there, and they're very there's no low frequency at all. They're high pass filtered a lot so that they don't interfere with the rest of the rhythm in the mix, and they seem to have that room reverb reflection thing going on to make them sound bigger. There's that thunder sample again. And those guitars have stayed. We can hear that ba 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 on the sides again. You can really hear that ba ba ba. And so I think at this point, after that big, the main vocal is louder than it was before. It's really been pushed up because there's so much going on now in the mix that it needs to be louder. Let's just play this little section here. I'm just going to put a marker in and then just go to nearer the beginning quickly. No, the volume's been compressed on the vocal to the point where it's very similar, but everything else has been built up around it. That's fascinating. So many extra vocal layers going on, which have now been dropped out. There's a guitar synth in at the end that definitely wasn't in there originally. You can hear that. Ba-dum, ba-dum. Okay, that was creepy at the end. I wasn't expecting that, but that sounds very much like mid-80s. It probably would have been some sort of eventide harmonizer or something like that, pitch shifting a vocal down by an octave because it sounds very inhuman. So it's been pitch shifted. It's probably Kate Bush again, but just been, rather than trying to get her to sing that low, she's sung it in a more natural octave and pitched it down, and it's been processed as well, so it sounds double kind of wide. So this is that soloed on the sides if it's there. You can hear it doesn't sound like a slowed down tape to me. It sounds like something that's been digitally processed, which in the mid-80s did exist. It was just really expensive. In the middle, I think we'll hear a much clearer high pitch. It's entirely possible that was just recorded on a tape track that where they ran the tape faster and she sang it in a higher key and then brought that down relatively. But yeah, it's a very dynamic song, as we can see from how the waveform gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And yeah, that was a massive set. The long-term LUFS on that, and this is from Amazon Music, was minus 15.5, which is at least a clear dB less than most of the services are recommending, which is fine. And a dynamic range of 13 LU, which is crazy for anything modern. You're looking at like 5 or 6 on a track usually, if you're lucky. So yeah, that is a very dynamic mix, very cool, lots going on. And so there you go. Absolutely fascinating mix. So thank you everybody for joining me on this little journey. Thank you to our patrons who help support this. The ice is melted in my glass because it's that hot. And we will return shortly with Walk by Pantera, which is a very clear-cut example of how kind of metal was changed in the early 90s. So I will see you all later on. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.